The Farm Bureau guest line for the first time today. Check out favorites.com and go with the home team. Mississippi Farm Bureau, Kendall Rogers from D1 Baseball joins us right now. And Kendall, we got a lot of baseball stuff to get to, but I gotta ask you a question. Who's in charge of planning when you are moving from one house to another the week leading into college baseball regionals?
It was a co-effort. I'll just leave it at that.
I mean, is this like the Jefferson style? We moving on up to the east side?
I guess you could say that.
Well, congratulations, buddy.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it should be interesting. It's kind of, it'll be nice to sit down and watch some baseball on Friday as we get the postseason started. I wish all three Mississippi schools were in this thing, but I guess beggars can't be choosers.
Wait, did that not happen this year?
I guess not.
We missed the memo. Let's start with Southern Miss. They were hanging right there on the edge. John Cohen said he thought they were maybe one win away. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that's one win at any point throughout the course of the season. I don't know if it's one more conference win. I don't know if it's maybe one less loss in the conference tournament. It feels like they did everything they could do, and the resume just wasn't quite there. I mean, is that how you sort it out when it's all said and done?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing when I look at this committee is I think they pretty much went right off of RPI. And if you looked at Southern Miss's RPI, I think it was either 21 or 22 on Selection Day. I just think the committee went with teams with higher RPI. So I think it's as simple as that. I mean, I would say this. I think if you look at Southern Miss, I mean, obviously I look at Alabama as a team that certainly should have hosted ahead of Southern Miss. But, I mean, if you're a USM fan and you look at Indiana State, 2-9 against top 50, top 100 record wasn't much better, but they had a higher RPI because of who they scheduled in non-conference. I have a little bit of bone to pick if I'm a USM fan with those guys hosting. So, the biggest thing when I look at this committee this year is it just feels like they pretty much just went right off the RPI. And what's really annoying is I feel like every single year the committee chairman, and I'm not just banging on John Cohen, I'm banging on all these people, but like every single year it's, hey, we're not going to rely so much on RPI, and every year we rely so much on RPI. So, we at this point, like we've kind of thought as a group, as a company, that we're like, hey, we're going to actually kind of put our brains together in the off season and actually come up with a formula that we feel is the most fair formula for all of college baseball, not just the South, not just the West, not just the North, but everybody. So that's kind of our off-season project we're going to do as an entire staff, and we got a couple of stats and analytics people that are going to work with us on it. So we'll see what we can come up with.
Well, that's great news, and I wanted to ask you about that, but I'll come back to Southern Miss in just a second. But I'm really curious because we were talking about this yesterday. Heard you say it, heard Kyle Peterson say it on the selection show. If the RPI is broken, then fix it, and fix it now. And obviously Kyle's involved with you guys. If the selection committee says it's broken, so what do you do to fix it, though? Because I don't know if there's a formula that's going to hurt an SEC team, right? I mean, you're trying to come up with a formula that benefits smaller schools and benefits schools who are geographically at maybe a disadvantage. But it is clear that the SEC was the best conference this year, maybe by a pretty significant margin. So what are we trying to do here?
Well, I mean, I think the biggest thing for me is, I kind of go back to my column I did with Pete Hughes from Kansas State is, he made the whole point that, we need to be able to drop the 4 or 5 bottom RPI games because if you're in the North, you're in the Midwest like Kansas, we got to play bad RPI teams. The problem with that is, and I kind of explained this to him, and he didn't really disagree. He just said, hey, I'm still okay with it, even though, you make a good point, is if you drop the bottom 4 or 5 RPI teams, I kind of made the example of, Mississippi State Ole Miss. If they drop, let's say Mississippi Valley the one time they played them a year, and then they drop Grambling, and then they drop Arkansas State. Well, guess what happens? The SEC teams are all dropping their 5 worst RPI teams. So guess what? Their RPIs are going to be even better. So, I mean, I think it would incrementally help the Kansas States and the Oregon States of the world, but I don't think it's a magic pill. I think the SEC teams aren't going to change. And the fact of the matter is, here's the facts is the SEC is just a way better league. I mean, you can do all the finagling you want, but at the end of the day, the SEC is by far the best baseball league in college baseball, and there's nothing that's going to change that. If anything, the gap's just going to widen.
Yeah. And I don't know that there's a magic bullet on this, so I certainly will look forward to what you guys come up with and see if it's something that gains some traction in the college baseball world.
Yeah, I mean, we're taking it pretty seriously. I mean, we're going to sit down and have some meetings, probably in Omaha, and actually kind of discuss, hey, kind of go around the table and like, hey, what would you change? What would you change? What would you change? And then kind of get with our analytics people and see what we can come up with. See if we can come up with a formula that, I thought Mike Rooney made a great point on ESPN on the selection show where you had UC Santa Barbara who had very similar metrics, but all of a sudden, like, their RPI was 30 spots off of NC State. That tells me there's a little bit of a broken system, and it's, maybe since NCAA is not going to do it, maybe it's our job on behalf of college baseball to kind of figure it out.
Let me ask you one question here and tell me, and again, I'm not smart enough to know if the math works on this. Could you allow for a team's RPI when you play them to be the number that stands? So in the case of UC Santa Barbara or UC Irvine, who had good wins against the Pac-12, but Pac-12 teams stumbled down the stretch and they fell out of the top 50, so those are no longer top 50 wins. Could it be based on what the RPI was of the team when you played them?
I kind of like that. I'm gonna write that down, actually. I like that because, you bring up a great example in UC Irvine. I mean, UC Irvine is a team that at one point, like maybe 2 weeks ago, they were 8-1 against the top 50. And because Arizona State, and I can't remember the other team, maybe it was Fullerton, both of those teams dropped out of the top 50, and all of a sudden their record went to 0-1.
Yeah.
And so, I just don't believe that in a 1 week span, what some other team did that you played 2.5 months ago should knock you out of the postseason. And honestly, I was disappointed that John made that as like the reason why they didn't get in, because he knows dang well that their top 50 RPI was 8-1 a week ago. So
sure.
It's just that's the best example imaginable is UC Irvine. I like that. I mean, it'd be interesting to see if you can stopgap the RPI every single week like that. If you can, I think it's a great idea.
Well, and I almost would lean in the direction of you can't be hurt by a team having their RPI fall, but you can be helped by a team that you beat who goes on to have a good year. If their RPI climbs, you get the advantage of that, but you don't take a disadvantage for a team that falls. That's just kind of thinking out loud, though. So,
yeah, and that kind of goes in the intent to schedule metric too. That's one thing John mentioned. He said he would like to see the RPI take into account intent to schedule, not just strength to schedule, but if you're Mississippi State and you schedule this year, if you schedule Arizona State and then you schedule Texas, and those two schools stink this year, well, that shouldn't hurt you. Your intent to schedule is very good. But again, if you do intent to schedule, then you're also throwing in the whole human element. We know what happens when we get involved in that.
So going back to Southern Miss, what about their draw? Going to the Auburn regional as a 2 seed. Give me a likelihood that Southern Miss advances to a super regional.
Well, I've got them advancing. If that makes some USM fans feel better. I will say this about Southern Miss. What I really, really like about this team is they've been in this spot before. They won a regional. They had to beat one of the most storied programs in college baseball history to win a regional. I think that regional kind of exhausted them because I think you kind of saw it against Ole Miss. I mean, Ole Miss obviously played great that next week and certainly the ensuing 2 weeks. But, they just looked out of gas against Ole Miss. And so I think this year they kind of learned some of the lessons from that regional when they had to beat LSU. And so this time of year I look at teams that are older, teams that have experience in the situation, teams that, have guys that have had a ton of bats. And when I look at Southern Miss, Danny Lynch, most deceiving batting average in college baseball. I think he's hitting 250, but it's every single time they need a big hit, he gets it. Slade Wilkes has had a big year. Tanner Hall. I just think they have a lot of really solid, experienced frontline guys. And I think they're dangerous. But Auburn is the other team for me that I think it's going to come down to those two teams. I give the edge to Southern Miss, but Auburn. The big key for them is they're obviously very offensive, but they've actually pitched really well the last 2 or 3 weeks for the most part. Tommy Vale's been pretty solid. Chase Allsup a couple of weeks ago gave them a really good start. So I really like the positioning of both of those teams. It should be a fun regional.
You got time to hang for one more today?
Sure, man.
Okay, good deal. I will ask you this 30 seconds before the break. Would you hold Tanner Hall for Game 2 potentially against Auburn, or would you pitch him in Game 1 against Samford?
I would not hold him. Not when you look at his matchup on the mound. I'm trying to remember. I think Shavers, I think is his last name. He's had great numbers this year, and you just can't risk that. Tony David's got a good club.
Yeah, he does, and they play really, really hard. That conversation right now, Kendall, we appreciate your time as always. It's been fun throughout the course of the year. You've made a lot of time for us, and it means a lot to us. So thanks for doing that throughout the year.
You got it, man.
So let's just kind of zip through the regionals and give me who you think the most likely winner is in each. We talked about the Auburn regional. You said you've got Southern Miss advancing out of that one. What about Baton Rouge? Any question that LSU emerges in Baton Rouge?
Yeah, I mean, I feel pretty good about LSU. I mean, obviously, keeping out on Sam and Oregon State, both those teams can really hit. But, I think LSU, looking back at the SEC tournament, I really like the way that, Ty Floyd pitching against A&M. I think that kind of gives them a little bit of momentum on the mound going into regional. So I like LSU.
Charlottesville, Virginia, East Carolina, Oklahoma, and Army.
I lean Virginia. East Carolina is really dangerous for me. Again, I kind of look at teams like Southern Miss and East Carolina kind of fit that same mold, a team that, last year was, left on the field in the Super Regional. ECU is dangerous, but I do lean chalk here on Virginia. Virginia's played really well the last 3 or 4 weeks.
Maybe nobody in America hotter than Clemson. They've won 16 in a row. They get Tennessee as a 2 seed, Charlotte as a 3, and Lipscomb as a 4. Charlotte's got a guy that can really swing it. I don't remember his name. Kid had 6 home runs.
Yeah, Cam Fisher.
Yeah, at big time in
he
the
leads the
conference
nation in
tournament.
home runs with 30 jacks.
Ooh, it's a pretty good year at the plate.
Yeah, decent year. I actually have Tennessee coming out of this thing.
Okay.
The thing about Clemson that scares me is they've won 16 straight games. How about we mix in a loss somewhere? I just wonder when a team's won that many games goes to the postseason. That scares me a little if I'm Eric Backett. So I like Tennessee.
Columbia, South Carolina. South Carolina the 1, Campbell the 2, NC State back in the tournament the 3, and Central Connecticut State, sneaky good program at number 4.
I'm actually going to go with South Carolina. I know they're still a little dinged up on the mound. This is a team that nobody around nobody in the country, for the most part, outside of Gamecocks fans, thinks should be hosting. I think they're going to come out fired up because of that. They're going to have something to prove, which I think with an SEC team like that is very dangerous. So I'm going to go with the Gamecocks, but that's going to be a great reason. Campbell thought they should have hosted NC State, even though they barely got in. They've got a lot of firepower offensively, but I think I lean South Carolina.
No disrespect here, but I feel like the Conway Regional is kind of boring. Coastal Carolina, Duke, UNC Wilmington, and Rider. Am I wrong about that?
You're not wrong. I would say I'm actually going to pick. So I like Coastal, but I think my runner-up would be UNC Wilmington. I think UNC Wilmington actually has a pretty solid rotation. Like Jacob Schaefer's a really talented arm. Offensively, Jack Kroom and Tanner Thatcher, two really good power hitters and consistent hitters. You keep it on UNC Wilmington, but I'm leaning Sox here a little bit.
Not a boring regional here in Coral Gables. Miami, Texas, the Ragin' Cajuns of Louisiana, and Maine.
Yeah.
That's fun.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. Louisiana is really, really interesting in the sense that, again, they've got a lot of kids who played in a regional last year. Heath Hood, Julian Brock, Kyle DeBarge. Texas, LeBaron Johnson has pitched really well for them. I lean Miami at home. I just don't think either of those two teams have the depth to beat Miami and Coral Gables. But, weather's probably going to play a part as it usually does there. You're going to have a lot of rain delays, so the teams that can overcome those rain delays will be the team that can win that regional.
Yeah, we certainly saw that a year ago. What about in Fayetteville? Arkansas, TCU, Arizona, Santa Clara. This is a fun one, at least from a name brand standpoint.
Yeah, I like Arkansas on this one. I mean, TCU, for me, is a really interesting one just because I saw them last week in Dallas, and they were fantastic. Elijah Nunez and Braden Taylor were really good. But it's hard to go against the Hogs at home. I mean, they're just a machine there. I would say if you're watching region this weekend, tune in for Chase Davis of Arizona. If you haven't seen that dude hit home runs, everything he hits is pretty much like 430 feet. So keep an eye on Chase Davis. He's a really good one.
Down in Gainesville, you got Florida, who I think is just a really, really good team. Hard to find a weakness there. UConn is the 2 seed. That's a dangerous 2 seed. Texas Tech, the 3, and then Florida A&M, the 4.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, I think when you look at that regional as a whole, Texas Tech isn't quite as good as they have been. I think when you look at those guys from a pitching standpoint, they leave a little bit to be desired. And, UConn is a club that, last year, again, we talk about, teams that have, been in those situations before, and UConn's a club that last year was left on the field in the Super. Frankly, they had a really good shot. I mean, if you remember, they won the first game at Stanford and then lost the last two, I think the second one in heartbreaking fashion. But, I think when you look at those guys, I think they're dangerous. And, obviously Florida. Florida is, not to spoil it, but Florida is my national championship pick. I just love their vibe. They're a hard-nosed team. They're cocky, but I don't feel like they're Tennessee-like. They're hard-nosed, which is kind of interesting because typically the stigma on Florida is a bunch of showcase ponies, but they're hard-nosed, and I think they've got a really good bullpen. So I like Florida.
We're running a little short on time. I'm going to skip around on a couple of these as we were just walking through them. Let's go to Tuscaloosa. I'm intrigued by that because that's where I'm going to be. Alabama, Boston College, Mike Gambino's club, Troy, and Nichols in Tuscaloosa. Does Alabama stay hot?
I think they do. But by the way, the accent competition between you and the Boston College guys ought to be interesting. But you and Mike Gambino, I need like a video of you two talking to each other. If you haven't talked to him, his accent's extremely Boston.
It's very Boston. I had them a couple of years ago when they were in Oxford, and they play a fun style. You want to talk about hard nosed? Boston College plays.
Oh man, yeah, and I'll tell you what, they feel like they should have hosted, and they're going to come in there ready to crack some bones, so to speak. And when you look at BC, Joe Petrano is kind of the guy that makes them go. If you look back earlier this year. When they played Tennessee, he was the guy that had a big-time performance. Circle him. But I really like Bama's club, and I think they're dangerous against Wake Forest, potentially in the Super, too. I just think when you look at those guys on the mound, I think they've got 3 solid weekend starters. Offensively, Andrew Pinckney is the guy that just makes them go. I love Andrew Pinckney. He's just a physical presence. He seems like a really fun kid. That's it. The thing I like about Alabama, they're a really, really easy team to like. And given all they've gone through, it makes them a cool story. So I like Alabama to win that thing.
Hey, can Texas A&M win the Stanford Regional with the way they pitched it last week?
Well, so the question is, and like you and I have talked about this plenty of times, the question is, can they finally put together consistency? I mean, if you think back, remember A&M wins the Florida region or the Florida series at home, and you're thinking, oh, here they come. And then, and I think a week later, I think I called in like my sleeper, but then all of a sudden Alabama puts up a 23 spot on them in 2 games and beats them in a series in College Station. So I guess my question with the Aggies would be, hey, you played really well in Hoover. Like, can you actually do it 2 straight weeks? Because they really have not done that this year. They've got the strangest resume of anybody. They've won 6 SEC series, and I feel like it's been like good series, terrible series, good series, terrible series. So we'll see which team shows up this weekend. The good thing for A&M is Stanford is very SEC-like, and I think that actually helped them a little bit. And by the way, it will not be 105 degrees in Stanford. It'll be like 70 all weekend. So the Aggies should be jacked up about that one.
All right, last thing for you. The way the bracket sets up, you have the potential, it's unlikely, but the potential for 7 SEC teams in the College World Series. How many do you think actually get there?
I've got 4. I've got 4 SEC teams getting to Omaha. And by the way, I've got Southern Miss getting to Omaha. So There you go.
How about that? Great stuff, Kendall.
Scott Berry's just going to ride up in the sunset from Omaha.
Well, and he, sir, if anybody deserves it, he does. No question about that.
No question.